Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's final weekly virtual training session for 2023. My name is Mike, and I'm a project coordinator here with Africa Fire Mission. And we're so happy that you took time out of your busy schedules to come and join us for today's training. And a special thank you to all of you that have joined us every week throughout the year here in 2023. As we wrap up this year, our final presenter of the year is going to be Howard Cohen. Howard is our virtual training coordinator and has been doing a lot of great work with us, coordinating, getting these weekly training sessions available for you all, as well as traveling with us and training with you all in person. Before we get started here, just a couple of technical things. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you will receive a certificate of attendance for today's training. The name that you have here in Zoom is the name that'll go on that certificate. So if you'd like to change that to whatever your certificate reads, that would be much appreciated. Keep an eye in the chat. I'll be placing a link to our Google Drive down there where you can find a recording of today's class, as well as any of the other classes that we've done this year. If you go back and watch the video there and answer a few questions about the class, I can send you a certificate of attendance for taking that class as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you all just a few words of encouragement. Before we get started here, we're taking off the last 2 weeks of the year as it's the holiday season, and no matter what your faith is, this is a time where you can celebrate with your friends and your family the various seasons. For me, we're waiting to celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior, and I just wanted to do a quick sort of reminder of that from the second chapter of Luke, beginning in the 10th verse, the good news, but the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. For see, I'm bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." But during this holy time of year, for many of us, we're praying for that peace among you and among your family. If you do get some time off during this holiday season, please take that time to strengthen yourself and your families during this holy season. Thank you all for joining us again. We invite you to stick around. We will hold a tea time afterwards. It lasts for up to an hour, depending on how talkative everyone is. Feel free to stick around for that. That'll be a time where you can ask questions about today's class or anything else that may be on your mind. At this point in time, I'm going to pass things over to my good friend Howard to begin today's class. Take it away, sir.
Hi, everybody. Give me a second here to share my screen. Sorry about the bad lighting behind me. I'm in a different place today than where I usually am. But I do want to make sure that everybody mutes themselves. And now I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully I'll get it all sized up right. So today's webinar is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to and what you typically expect at a fire and first responder training. But I hope that you'll see why it's important. And just give me 2 more seconds here. I'm just getting everything adjusted on with the Zoom situation. Okay, so again, welcome, and I'm pleased that everybody is here. I hope you'll find this presentation interesting and a little bit different than what you're used to, and I think that's a good thing because we can get very sort of focused and zeroed in on certain aspects of what it means to be a first responder or a firefighter. So, and again, I want to thank you all for giving up an hour of your time this afternoon, and I hope I don't waste it. So I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you actually this question several times. Take a look at this picture. Look at all the different fire equipment that you see on there. There's hose lines, there's hand tools, there's all kinds of things. And I want you to ask yourself, think about the work that you do as a firefighter and think about how often you use each of those tools. And you don't have to write it in the chat or anything, but just think about it. Okay, next picture. Look at all those ladders. You see all those ladders there and the hose lines? How often do you place ladders? Do you pull the ladders off your apparatus and use them on fire ground? In the course of your shift, how often are you actually using ladders? Think about it. Now look at these special tools that you carry, that a lot of folks would carry in their personal gear. Hand tools, slings, gloves, carabiners, all kinds of special things, first aid equipment. Think about how often do you actually use any of these special tools? Now, I'm guessing you're thinking to yourself, not all that often. I can tell you for 20 years that I was in the fire service, yes, I used all these different tools at different times, but on any given day, I wasn't using them. It depends, of course, how busy your firehouse is. But the point is that we got an awful lot of tools on our fire trucks and the firehouse, but not sure how often we use them. Now take a look at this guy. How often do you use any of these tools? Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, what tools am I talking about? Well, I'll tell you, the tools I'm talking about are, well, let me go back and ask you. Go back and look at this picture, and this one, and this one, and this one. And now ask yourself, of all those different tools, which do you think are the most important? Feel free to put it in the chat if you want, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to check on the chat because we don't have enough time, but it's a thought exercise. Of all those different tools, which are the most important? All right, here's the answer. The four most important tools for a first responder are their brain, their ears, their body, and their mouth. Yeah, does my answer surprise you? Well, today I'm going to focus on the brain, the mouth, and the ears as three of our most important tools. We've had other trainings on physical fitness and taking care of our bodies, but I'm going to really zero in on the brain, the ears, and the mouth. The reason why is because it is my experience that how we use or misuse these three tools makes the fire ground safer and life around the firehouse way more pleasurable or not. So what I'm going to talk about today is what we call interpersonal communications and how our brain works. So at the end of the day, you spend a lot more time in the firehouse talking to your fellow firefighters and thinking about firefighting. And those are the tools that if we don't use those tools properly, not only are we not prepared for when we actually have to go on the fire ground, but we're also not necessarily cultivating good relationships with one another and creating an atmosphere that makes us want to stay in the fire service. So this is the definition of what an interpersonal communication is. It's the process of exchanging messages between people whose lives mutually influence one another in unique ways in relation to social and cultural norms. Now realize that that's a mouthful because we all know what communication is, right? We all know communication is talking back and forth. But if you stop and think about it, communications are essential. How we communicate, what our purposes are for communicating, how we receive messages. All of this is critical for, well, as you'll see, develop the quality or the way in which we're able to develop our interpersonal skills has a measurable impact on our psychological and physical health. Studies have shown that people with higher levels of interpersonal communication skills are better able to adapt to stress, have greater satisfaction in relationships, and more friends, and even have less depression and anxiety. And as first responders, you are constantly engaged in interpersonal communications, whether it's with one another on the fire ground or around the firehouse, during drills, while cleaning gear, hanging up gear, or interacting with civilians when you respond to calls. This is why, in my opinion, it is very important to spend some time understanding the dynamics of communications and learn how to master using the skills of your brain, your ears, and your mouth in the most effective way. So, first, a little evolutionary history. Early humans who lived in groups rather than alone were more likely to survive. Makes sense. Which meant that those with the capability to develop interpersonal bonds were more likely to pass these traits on to the next generation. So, if you look at my little graphic here, it shows sort of primitive forms of early forms of communication. Now we have TikTok, Instagram, our iPhones, and so forth. What was the point of a lot of our communications in the ancient world, in our primitive world? It was to have someone looking out behind you, like telling you that there's a danger behind you. So we were looking out for each other. Our communications were there to help us survive and help us thrive. So survival was our ancestors' first and highest priority. Accordingly, our ancient ancestors' brains developed all kinds of ways of enhancing our survival. Today, we lump those survival skills into three general behaviors. We call them fight, flight, or paralysis. If you're wondering what this all has to do with communications, bear with me, I'll explain. Our brains are wired to respond to interactions that trigger a variety of specific survival behaviors. Thanks to research, we now can identify these as 10 particular types of responses. On one level, these responses might be seen as useful, but on another level, they can actually undermine, among other things, our interpersonal communications and relationships. Let me give you an example. When you're in a dangerous environment, it is important to be hypervigilant. But when you're not in a particularly dangerous environment, hypervigilance makes you paranoid. So what I mean by this is that if you're in a dangerous environment, like you're at a fire ground, you need to be very, very alert to all the dangers that could happen to you. So you become hypervigilant. But if you spend the rest of your time not on the fire ground with your family or friends, constantly looking over your shoulder, constantly afraid of something bad that might happen, you essentially become paranoid. And that's going to undermine your relationships with everybody. And it's going to make you look like you're always looking for something to happen. So people are going to be like, dude, I don't want to hang out with you. You're always like afraid something bad's going to happen. So if you're a hyper-vigilant person, when someone approaches with a problem they want to discuss, there's a high potential you will react negatively to them because you are already on high alert for some imagined danger. In effect, what were once a life-saving reactions now sabotage our relationships. I hope that's clear. Now I could go into much more depth in terms of these different 10 particular kinds of responses, but I don't really want to right now because I just want to focus on one in particular. So again, our brain had sort of developed in two parts to our brain. We have what I'd like to call our survive side of the brain, which roughly corresponds with what we call the left side of the brain. And we know this because of brain mapping. We know that the survival skills that can be helpful but also undermine our relationships tend to be or originate in the survival side of the brain on the left side. And the thrive side of the brain, or our right side, is where things like positive emotions emanate from, creativity, enthusiasm, things like that. So we have these two sides of the brain, but here's the cool thing. The brain is just a big muscle. And like any muscle, we can make it stronger or weaker. We can overdevelop our arms if we want to, and look like, we have these giant arms and teeny tiny little legs, or we can develop all our bodies. So with our brain, what's happened is that there's the way the brain mapping works, it's somewhat easier for the survive side of the brain to develop become stronger. And what we want to do is learn how to develop the thrive side so that the survival reactions are still in place, but they don't dominate our relationships. So how do we do? What's going on? Well, these 10 things that I was mentioning, I like to call them saboteurs. They sabotage our relationships with one another. And the king of saboteurs is something I'd like to call the judge. So stop, as I go through this, reflect on yourself and just ask yourself, is this true for you in some way? Do you find yourself judging yourself against others? I'm not good enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not big enough. I'm not smart enough. Do you find yourself judging yourself like that? Or how about do you judge others? That person's not good enough. That person's, they're mean, or that person, they think they know too much. So we often spend a lot of time judging others. And we also judge our situation. Well, if I wasn't, if this didn't happen to me, or, I wasn't assigned to this firehouse, or whatever it is, we judge our situation as the cause or reason why we're not having the success or happiness we want in our life. So the thing is that everyone suffers from the judge. When we are interacting with others, we are always at risk of either judging ourselves, judging the other person or people, or judging our situation. And once we start judging, we slide into kind of that negative headspace, that survival space. Well, if I'm not good enough now, maybe I need to become a hyperachiever, or there's all these different ways that we could respond. And it usually comes from somehow we're judging ourselves, judging others, or judging our situation. So when we're judging ourselves, we're saying, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not something, whatever it is. When we're too busy judging ourselves critically, when we're too busy judging ourselves, we become self-critical. We blame ourselves unnecessarily, and we start to not like ourselves. And when we don't like ourselves, other people don't like us either. Now, stay with me. I'm going to explain more how this impacts our interrelationships if you haven't already begun to get a feeling for that. Or we're judging others. When we judge others, we're usually hurting their feelings. We're making them feel unappreciated. We end up putting them down or insulting them. They're not good enough. They're not smart enough. They're not. No one wants to be judged like that. You don't want to hear from your colleagues in the firehouse that you're not smart enough or you're not good enough, that they don't want to ride in the truck with you. So we judge others. And finally, we blame our situation. When we do that, we stop taking responsibility for our actions. Hey, it's not my fault I messed up. It's because I have bad equipment, or because my chief is not a very good chief. If we spend our time looking for, when we're judging our situation, what we're doing is we're spending our time looking for excuses rather than taking positive action. All of this judging creates an atmosphere of distrust, which then undermines our ability to communicate with others in a healthy, positive way. And that brings me back to the thrive and survive part of the brain. In other words, how do we shift from operating in the survive part of the brain to the thrive part of the brain, where things like creativity, empathy, kindness, compassion, ingenuity can thrive? So here's what we're going to start with. In order to make the most out of our interpersonal relationships, we must start with learning how not to judge others, ourselves, or our situation. So how do we do this? And by the way, I want to talk about something called empathy. Empathy is a really important step to take to move away from so that you're not judging other people. I don't know how well the word empathy translates into other languages. I was talking to a Kenyan friend of mine and asking for a Swahili definition for empathy, and he offered me two different words, but I'm not sure if he was understanding empathy, if we were getting to empathy or sympathy, because they're two different things. And as we went back and forth, he suggested two different words, and maybe something have to do with context, but I'm not really sure. So I'm going to stick with the English word of empathy, and I'll define it for you. So the way we shift away from being judgmental is we do two things. First of all, we empathize with ourselves and towards others, and we get curious by asking questions. But let's go back to empathy. Empathy is the ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in that person's situation. I know it's a mouthful. I'll read it. I'll say this again. It is the ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in that person's situation. You can also be sympathetic towards yourself. Let me say, don't confuse empathy with sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone. Empathy is being able to relate to what they're experiencing. Let me give you some examples. A friend of yours' parent dies. You feel bad for your friend, so you share sympathy with them. You say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." Okay, that's sympathy. Your parent just died, and the other person's parent just died. Now you feel empathy. You could say, I know, I have an idea what you're going through because my dad just died, and I know what that feels like, and I know that your dad just died. That's empathy. Empathy is because you can relate to the person's feelings or the experiences they're having. Sympathy is when you just feel bad for somebody. Now, you can be empathetic towards yourself. You can, part of being empathetic is to be kind and to be understanding. So instead of judging yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not blah, I'm not this, I'm not that, say, you know what? I'm doing a good job. I'm learning a lot. I'm working hard. I'm a good guy. So you could be empathetic with yourself. So empathy is towards yourself and towards others is really kind of the first thing we want to do to shift away from judging other people. Once we shift from judging ourselves or other people or situations, the quality of our interpersonal communications will improve. And we'll also start to experience some more sense of happiness and success. Now, what do I mean by get curious? Well, instead of judging someone, get curious about them and ask some questions. What are you thinking? How's it going for you? What's happening with you? I'm interested to know what brought you into the fire service. If you're wondering why that person became a firefighter, instead of thinking, why the heck would you become a firefighter? You're not, competent. Ask them what brought them in. And in that process, you develop some empathy with them, but also you're not judging, you're not telling them, you're listening to them. So you're asking questions, asking what we call open-ended questions that invite them to talk about themselves or their situation. When you do both of these things, empathize and get curious with the people or your situation around you, it improves the quality of relationships. Here, let me give you another example about being curious and also empathize. Something's at the firehouse is driving you crazy. So one of the things you could do is you could judge everybody and say, why are you doing that? Why is it this situation? This is crazy. And instead you can go to the people and say, hey, I'm curious, what's going on with you? We're not getting this job done. They might say, well, I'm having a really hard time because my child is sick or because I'm behind on my bills. So by asking questions and being curious, you invite the person to be less defensive and more willing to share with you. That's all towards improving interpersonal communications, building trust with one another. That improves the quality of life around the firehouse. That makes you better and more prepared and more eager to train and do the job of firefighting with one another. I hope you're seeing why I think this is all such an important tool. Let's take a quick look at 3 functions of interpersonal communications. You probably don't think much about communications because, hey, I just talk, I send email, I send TikTok, things like that. But their communication really serves some primary functions. First and foremost, especially in the fire service, it's to get things done. You know, the way your chief or your officers presents information to you makes a huge difference. How you receive it, what's your willingness to do it, what level quality do you want to respond to. So one thing is it's to get things done. It's to request or present information or ask for or give support. Another aspect of interpersonal communications is simply to maintain our relationships. You might, by that I mean, it means paying attention to the people you're around, putting your relational partner's needs before your own, celebrating accomplishments, spending time together, checking in. You know, you have something great going on in your life, and you come to the firehouse and you're all real excited about it, and you want to share that, and the people around you go, dude, I don't really care. I don't care that you're celebrating. I don't care that you got all this good news. Don't bother me with that. That's your stuff. Keep it at home. Well, that's going to turn you off. That's not going to improve the quality of your relationships or your quality of your time, your experience there. So you see, at one level, communication is about maintaining and or developing our relationships. You all have people that you like to talk to and who like to talk to you. Why? Because you are building or maintaining that kind of relationship in communications. We also communicate to project ourselves in particular ways. That's why we have uniforms. That's why we, want to look sharp when we respond to calls. That's why we want to take care of our equipment, because we want to be perceived as professionals. And so when you go to a fancy event, you dress up. Why? Because you want to present yourself in a certain way. That's another way in which we communicate. We do that verbally. We do that and physically. Okay, so let's get into this is what communication is all about. It's essentially, it's a process by which one person sends a message to another person. The receiver then returns a message, thereby completing the communication loop. Simple, right? Well, actually, it requires a lot of things to go right for the message the sender wants to deliver to be received. We have all sent messages to people in one way or another. Most commonly these days, we send an email message to someone who receives it in a way that is totally different than we intended it. That's communication loop. It didn't go right. But we've also been in situations where we've said something to someone. We've said, hey, blah, 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 blah. And that person doesn't hear blah, 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 blah. They hear, screw you. Why did you do that? Not our intention. So how we send our message and how it's received, not always a straightforward loop. And here's why. Because we communicate in different ways and in different levels. On the one hand, we have verbal communication. It's based on what we say and how we say it. The emphasis here is on how we say it. If I say to you, I'm so mad at you, I can't believe what you did, my verbal message does not correspond with my nonverbal message. If I say to you, on the other hand, what you did was the best thing I've ever seen, and I can't believe no one else has done that. My nonverbal message doesn't convey the same thing as my verbal message, where I want to say, wow, I can't believe you've done that. That's the most amazing thing. So we verbally communicate, but we also are simultaneously doing nonverbal communications. What are some other nonverbal communications? Think about it. You ever roll your eyes when somebody said something to you you thought was nonsense? Rolling your eyes, or make some funny shrugs. How about smiling at something someone has said? That's if it's a message that's supposed to evoke a smile and you smile, that's a verbal communication with a nonverbal response. Like vice versa, if it's they're communicating something that should not be responded with a smile and you smile, then you're giving a different kind of response. Applause is a nonverbal response. It's a form of communication. Ignoring someone is actually a form of communication. Like when you ignore someone intentionally, it's as if you're saying, I'm not going to be bothered by you. I'm ignoring you because you're not important to me. So there's all kinds of different ways we do nonverbal communications that in connection with our verbal ones. And then we have our writing forms of communications. And then last but not least, we have listening. Now, people tend to not think of listening as as a form of communication. But the truth is, if a person doesn't listen, communication didn't happen, right? So it's critical. And as I said, choosing to not listen to someone, ignoring them, is an incredibly painful and difficult and hurtful way of communicating something. So in fact, listening or not listening is really important. So, like I said, listening is a critical part of the communication process. Interestingly enough, to be a good listener is not as easy as you might think. It's not just a matter of the sound getting into my ear. There's more to it. There's actually different kinds of ways of listening. Generally speaking, there's 4 basic types of listening: deep, full, critical, and sympathetic. I'm going to go through each of these. These are not absolute terms. You can do your own research on listening and you might find some different kinds of terms, but what you'll find is that there's a similarity to whatever term is used. They might refine it even more specifically, but this just gives you a general idea. We're talking about the listening part of the communications. So deep listening. This is when you're really listening to understand. It's like, an example of this is like your child is telling you something really, really important. So you really want to pay attention. You might lean in to listen to them. You're really committed to understanding the speaker's perspective. It involves paying attention to both the verbal and nonverbal cues. You're really focused in. You're paying attention to the words being used, the speaker's body language, and their tone of voice. You're really paying attention to everything. When you're listening like this to someone, it truly helps to build trust and rapport, and it helps others feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and opinions to you. You're not thinking of a response of what should be said. You're just listening, really deeply listening to what they have to say. I'll tell you a couple side stories about deep listening. I used to work in a prison, and one day I was a prison chaplain. One day I was called into a section of the prison called the restricted housing unit, where in the United States there's prisons within prisons. And a man calls me over to his cell. I can't take him out of the cell because it's a punishment. He's in a small cell, and he's talking to me through a metal meshing, and he's leaning into it, and he's talking in a hushed tone, has a bit of kind of a heavy accent, and he's talking and he's talking, and I'm leaning in and I'm looking up at him, and I'm really, really deeply listening to what he's saying and watching his body language. When I see his head lift up, I lift my head up to make eye contact. I was really, really deeply listening. And then at the end of it, he looks at me, lifts his head up, wipes away a tear, and he says, "Thank you," and he walks away. I was deeply listening, but I want to tell you, I never heard a word he said. I couldn't understand him because of the environment. But to him, I was deeply listening because I was responding. I was responding with my body language, with listening, leaning in. I wasn't trying to give him an answer to what he was talking about. So that's deep listening. Being a full listening is when your whole body is listening to someone. Full listening involves paying close and careful attention to what the speaker is conveying. It often involves the use of active listening techniques, and this is where it's different than deep listening. Using active listening techniques such as paraphrasing what's been said to the person who's speaking with you. In other words, so what you're telling me is am I understanding you correctly? Things like that. Um, it helps to make sure that you're understanding their message, and that so that you're understanding it and they're communicating it clearly, and your body language is showing you're paying attention. Full listening is useful in the classroom when someone is instructing you on how to complete a task and when discussing work projects with superiors, because you want to make sure you fully understand. Now, what questions do you have? Well, I have a question because I've been listening. I've been watching what you were doing, or whatever it is. You're fully listening. You're paying attention on the speaker, the presentation. Now, critical listening is when you're involves using systematic reasoning and careful thought to analyze the speaker's message and separate fact from opinion. Critical listening is often useful in situations when speakers may have a certain agenda or goal, such as watching political debates or when a salesperson is pitching a product or service. In other words, you're listening, but you're listening critically. Why is that person saying this? What is the point of them bringing this up? Is that true what they're saying? That's kind of what's critical listening. I have the habit of critical listening to people a lot these days because there's a lot of political stuff going on. And one of the ways I demonstrate that I'm critically listening is I'll say to them, how do you know what it is that you're now saying? What is the source of what this information is coming from? I'm both challenging them because I'm critically listening, but I'm also looking to find out, wow, maybe what they're saying is true or is a fact. And that's important to me. And that's what critical listening, very different than the deep listening or the full listening, because now I'm really listening to be potentially critical if what I'm hearing isn't holding up to be true. A lot of times, that's how critical listening is how we dispel rumors, or we put conspiracy theories to the side. We'll say, wait a second, I'm listening to what you're saying. It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy. Okay, that's critical listening. And then there's sympathetic listening. Sympathetic listening means allowing a friend, a colleague, or family member to discuss their problems. It involves emphasizing and applying supportive nonverbal cues, such as nodding. Okay, oh, I'm sorry, I hear what you're saying. Maintaining eye contact. It also could be sympathetic by, just like, yeah, I feel your pain. I feel sad for you. I feel what's going on. If you can empathize, that's fine too. But you're really just being there. You're letting them say what they want to say. And if they want to vent out sadness, anger, you don't say to them, don't say that, don't do that. That doesn't make sense. You just listen. You're just a person who's listening sympathetically to give so that person knows they're not alone, that they have a friend, they have some support. So that's sympathetic listening. Now let's talk a little bit more about active listening, because active listening is really important. And I love this quote from this author. The book, by the way, is very good. I read it a long time ago, The Road Less Traveled. So he says, you cannot truly listen to anyone and do anything else at the same time. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're talking to someone and you just don't think they're paying attention because they keep picking up their phone, responding to a text message, they're looking this way and that way. Yeah, they're not really paying attention in any way. So if you're going to listen to someone, whatever kind of listening you're doing, it's got to be an active listening. When I was a kid growing up, I used to go to tell my mom something, and I could see her reading the magazine. She was not active listening. And it would get frustrating for me, such that I would just walk away in the middle of a sentence, waiting to hear her go, well, Howard, are you going to finish? I hate to say it, a lot of times she didn't. So she really wasn't active listening. And I could tell. So active listening there's some qualities to it. Depending on the kind of listening you're doing, no matter, you're going to listen without making judgments or take a position on an issue. You might be critical, you might want to ask questions, but as you're listening without making judgments. You're going to allow the speaker to finish their thoughts without interruption. This is a hard one, because as we're listening to somebody, And as we're disagreeing, if we're doing critical listening and we disagree, we want to say, wait a second, yes, but, or interrupt them and say, no, you're not right. So we got to let people finish their thoughts without interrupting them. We show that our attention is focused on them. We're making eye contact. We lean in towards the speaker and so forth. Some of the things we talked about. And active listening means you check in to make sure that what you've heard is you're hearing what they're saying accurately. Sometimes the words someone the words they're sharing are not necessarily getting to the message they're trying to convey. And so if you're not sure what they're saying is getting to what the message you think they're trying to say, then you need to just ask them to say, hey, am I hearing you right? Or what you saying is this? So you're saying X, Y, and Z. Your captain on the fire ground says, hey, I want you to go and around to the backside of the building and do this and this and this, such and such task. Okay, you think you understand what your captain asked you to do, but you're not sure. So you better ask for accuracy. Say, Captain, you want me to go around to the backside of the building and do place a ladder? What did you want me to do? I didn't understand. It wasn't clear to me. Okay? You ask questions as needed when you don't understand what the speaker is trying to communicate. All right? And if sometimes it's good to give a summary to indicate what you have heard and understood what was said. Now, we use radios a lot in the fire service in the United States, in North America. I know there are not a lot of radios that you all use, but I can still give you an example of communications that we use with radios that corresponds to what I'm talking about. Radio, we want to make sure we know who we're talking to. So we say, hey, this is such and such. Departments have different, slightly different variations on this. We identify who it is speaking, who we're speaking to. We tell them what we want to tell them as clearly and simply as possible. The person we're radioing repeats the lesson, the instructions to make sure that they heard exactly what the correct thing is, and then we confirm that the message has been communicated as it was intended. So it's important to make sure that what you heard and understood is what the person was trying to say. So I'm wrapping up here. I want to say the biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. I want to elaborate on this just in the last couple of minutes before we wrap up. Have you ever been listening to somebody and disagree with what they're saying, but you patiently wait until they're done or they pause so you can point out why you disagree with them? Sure, we've all done that. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that we stopped listening as soon as we wanted to respond to what it was we thought we heard that we didn't agree with. And when you do that, you stop listening. You're not listening to understand the full thing they're saying. You're just waiting to be able to give that reply so you can say yes, but. And that yes, but, that's how we always do it. I suspect that's probably pretty universal, but it's us saying we've stopped listening and we're ready to reply to what we heard, respond to what we heard before. And so it's just really important. When you're listening, you have to listen to the whole thing they're saying. It has happened in many times, and I'm sure it's happened to all of you at some point. Someone was ready to interrupt you or interrupted you as you were saying something, and that you didn't get a chance to finish what you wanted to say. And if they'd only let you do that, then they would have heard that you were going to say the exact same thing that they needed to interrupt you to say. So that's something to just keep in the back of your mind. All right, I want to wrap up with this final note. The quality of our interpersonal skills has a measurable impact on our psychological and physical health. People with higher levels of interpersonal communication skills are better able to adapt to stress, have greater satisfaction in relationships, and more friends, and have less depression and anxiety. And this, my friends, is why I think good communication skills makes the fire ground safer, makes you a better firefighter and first responder, makes life around the firehouse more pleasurable, and makes everybody succeed with a kind of ease and flow because you are trusting one another, you are building rapport, you are wanting to be with each other because your way of interacting, your communications with one another are deep and meaningful. And so, on that note, I want to stop by sharing and say to you, thank you for giving me 45, 50 minutes of your day to present this information to you. I know it's not a typical fire training kind of presentation, but I do truly believe that uh, improving communication skills and your interpersonal relationships will only make you a better firefighter and make life more pleasurable for you. So on that note, I want to wish all whatever holidays you are observing or celebrating, or whether or not you celebrate any holidays, I wish you all well. I wish you all safe and safe excitement as firefighters. And on that note, Mike, I'll turn it back to you and open up the floor for questions or comments, and however you want to handle that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Howard. If you guys have any questions or comments about today's training, go ahead and place your questions either in the chat or we'll get things set up so that you can unmute yourself. And we'll just give a few moments here to see if anyone's got any questions about today's training.
Good evening.
Hey, Errol, how are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
Very well, very well. What's on your mind?
Yeah, today's lesson was super amazing. I think it translates to everyone in our lives apart from our department. Just a question. Howard has said we listen and listen well. Does it translate to writing also when you're writing something or when you're coming up with something to, let's say, putting it in writing?
Yes, actually, Errol, that's a great question. If talking about how we communicate in writing is a whole nother, could be a whole nother hour-long presentation. So as the writer, as the one either writing an email, writing a letter, writing, an Instagram message, or whatever it is, you do need to pay real close attention to the words you use and the way you present your writing. It used to be that if you wrote an email and you made things in all capital letters, people said it was like shouting. I'm not sure that everybody interprets it that way, but that's how people have said it. Also, if you bold things, are you trying to emphasize, or did you just forget, paying attention? And how am I trying to communicate things? Now, from the reader's point of view, in the quote listener reader kind of category, it's very, very easy to make assumptions or judge what the person was saying or their intention. We often read into these messages issues or disagreements or tensions that we're having, and that's not all. And often it's not legitimate in the sense of that's not really what's going on. It's like, but we jump to the conclusions because we read into the text. So this is where the judgment thing comes in. Oh, I'm reading this text from this person or this email. Once again, they're judging me because they're presenting something critical. Now I'm feeling defensive because I'm being judged and I don't want to feel judged. So now I'm going to react from that defensive place of saying, well, I don't want to be judged and you're judging me. And then the person's writing back and saying, oh, I didn't mean this. I wasn't trying to judge you. I wanted to point this out. So yes, Errol, you're absolutely right. How we write and when we're writing, we're communicating. When we're reading or receiving what was sent to us in writing, we're the listener, and how we listen and how we receive it makes a whole lot of difference. Again, just use the sort of the empathy model and say, if it's my child sending me a letter from boarding school or from camp or from whatever, I'm going to read that in a different kind of way than if it's a colleague who's shooting me a text message about, where did you leave the hand tool, the axe that we use. So we read and receive differently based on who we're connecting with and how we empathize or not with the person. And again, also, if you get a written message and it triggers something like an unpleasant feeling in you, get curious about it. Like, what is it about what Mike sent to me in that email that made me feel a little defensive? Now I'm getting curious about what Mike said, and I'm thinking, maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. So, or I might say, Mike, I'm curious, what was your intent with that point that you made? So I've now responded to that negative sensation that I got by getting curious. Or maybe I know that Mike's going through a really difficult time, and I'm going, you know what? Mike's going through a really hard time. I bet he didn't mean anything hurtful about this. So you see, it crosses the board in terms of communication. So I hope it answers your question, Errol.
Yes, it's well answered. Thank you very much, Howard.
I see we got a couple. We have Isaiah has a hand up.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you so much
Hello.
for this amazing class, Howard.
Afternoon.
Just one comment is that what you said, that we don't listen to understand, we listen to answer. It is very important that most of us are always jumping up to show the other person that we know more than the person we are going to listen to.
You nailed it. You nailed it. So that's totally. We're judging. We're judging them or whatever. We're too busy coming up with our response. Oh, sometimes it's a response. I want to show them how smart I am. So I'm thinking about my response, and I'm going to be like, how smart can my response be? And meanwhile, we miss everything they're saying. So yeah, good point.
And the funny part is that we don't even listen to the whole thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Howard, we have a question in the chat just asking you to go over that difference between empathy and sympathy one more time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking that question, because quite frankly, a lot of us get these confused a lot of the time. So, sympathy is basically just feeling bad for someone. You like, it's easier to give some examples, but let me just say, sympathy is when you feel bad for someone. You just feel bad for them. Empathy is when you can really relate to what they're experiencing. Whether or not you've actually had that experience, but you can relate to it, and that gives you a different level of understanding. Let's say, we all live in places where we encounter people who are homeless, who are living on the street, and most of us, we feel bad when we see these people living like this. That's sympathy. We might give them a little bit of financial support. We might whatever, but we feel bad. But if you yourself have ever been homeless and you see someone else who's homeless, you could really relate to their experience. Now, these are extremes examples, but I hope it makes a difference. Sympathy is just feeling bad for someone. Empathy is being able to really understand or relate to the experience because either you've gone through it or you just have the ability to empathize because you can understand what it must be like to be having that experience. I hope that clarifies it for the person who asked the question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. How do you manage in an environment where you have different languages?
I just wanted to find out about the lecture.
Hang on a second, Larry. Let's get another question on the table first. So, well, first of all, if you can't understand the words of your language, which is that's already a challenge. But our nonverbal cues are going to be really helpful. You don't have to understand a child who's crying in a language that you don't understand and crying, calling to for help in a language you don't understand if you see the child crying and needs help. So when we have to shift and when we don't understand the words, we have to pay more attention to reading the body language. Because obviously don't know the words. We can't know for sure, but you could tell by the body language what's happening. I was just watching a movie the other day where something horrible is happening in the world. The guy is driving his car, and he's afraid of what's happening, and he sees a woman. She stops the car. And she's calling for help. She could tell by everything in her body asking for help. He doesn't understand a word she's saying, and he ends up saying, "I don't know what you're saying," and he drives away. But then he feels really bad because he knows the woman was asking for help. He just didn't understand what she was saying. So again, if you can't understand what the words are, then you have to read the body language. And by the way, we do this when we respond to patients or victims in situations who are hearing impaired. Maybe they can't hear us, or maybe they have a speech problem. More and more we're learning how to work with people who are on the autism spectrum, whose verbal communications might not match their nonverbals, or their nonverbals might not match their verbal communications. So we have to try and communicate, to listen on all the levels that are available to us. Hope that answers.
Thank you so much. It's all clear.
Yeah.
What about in the fireground? Okay, let's say we are at an incident, you are Christian, you are trying to send a message, someone who cannot speak your language. Should you make it in a command way or in another way?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's situational. Look, if the person is in imminent danger, their life is in imminent danger, and you're yelling at them, "Hey, get out of there," and they're not responding, then you've got to use another way. It's just situational in that case.
Clear.
I had that happen to me once. Early on in my fire career, there was a fire in the building very close to where I was at the time. So I got there right away before the fire trucks and anything. And there's a guy standing there with a garden hose trying to put out this fire. And my brain is saying, I don't want to go inside where that guy is standing with the fire hose. I don't have any equipment. I'm waiting for my fire truck to show up. And I'm yelling at him to get out, drop the hose and get out. And he's not responding. Well, I found out later on, no one got hurt, everything was fine. But I found out later on that he was hearing impaired. He couldn't hear me yelling, get out, get out. So again, it was a miscue, something I learned, but it happens. It happens all the time. And it also happens that people can't hear us. So we have to use body gestures, things like that, or get down, whatever, because they can't hear. So yeah. So it's all about communications, all about communication.
Yeah. Excellent. It looks like we've got a couple more questions, and we're going to get to those. At this time, though, I do want to wrap up the formal portion of our training and thank Howard for coming. If you can stick around a little bit, we'll get to the rest of these questions. I just want to reiterate, this is our last training of the year, so thank you all for coming. For next year's training, we'll begin again on the first Wednesday in January. There will be a new registration link. So the link that you're using for today's training won't work for you in the new year. So we'll be putting out on our social media, on our networking group, on our WhatsApp group. We'll be providing you with a link where you can register for the trainings for next year. Those should be up in about a week. You can also go to africafiremission.org and find under resources and training materials. In another week or so, there'll be a link there to register for next year's classes. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to Howard. We'll continue these questions here in just a moment. Thanks, everyone.